It spoke to me, a ranger's life-changing Bigfoot encounter in Montana that destroyed everything I thought I knew. June 1987. Pentagon Mountain. What started as a routine patrol investigating poaching reports became something the government would bury for 35 years. 18-inch footprints. Structures woven from pine, tools carved from antler. My horse Rex's neck snapped clean. Not for food, as a warning. 3 nights of coordinated tree knocks, answering my movements. Stones thrown with calculated precision. Then exhaustion drove me from my tent. In my flashlight beam, 8 feet tall, reddish-brown hair, gold-flecked eyes, holding unmistakable intelligence. It spoke one word: leave. Federal agents arrived within hours. Confiscated evidence, classification documents, threats. Lab results showed unknown primate DNA. 3 other rangers encountered them all silenced. But here's what haunts me as cancer eats through what's left of me. Leaked documents reveal an entire population, secretly managed for centuries. In 2022, satellite images show they're gone, all relocated to Site 47. Why did the government hide an intelligent species for 200 years? And what made them suddenly take them all away? The morphine drip clicks every 12 seconds. I've been counting them for the past hour, here in this hospice bed that smells like industrial bleach and impending death. My name is Thomas Crenshaw, and I'm 78 years old. The cancer that's eating through my pancreas has maybe 3 weeks left to finish its work, which means I've got about that long to tell you something I've kept locked away for 35 years. They told me if I ever spoke about what happened in the summer of 1987, I'd lose my pension, my reputation, and possibly more. Well, I'm losing everything anyway now, so to hell with their threats. Besides, someone needs to know. Someone needs to understand what's really out there in those mountains, and why the government has spent decades making sure you never find out. I spent 20 years as a park ranger in Montana's backcountry. Started in '67, fresh out of the Army, thinking I'd found the perfect job getting paid to hike through God's country, keeping the wilderness safe for the families who came up from Missoula or Great Falls for their weekend camping trips. By 1987, I knew the Scapegoat Wilderness better than most people know their own backyards. Every trail, every creek, every ridge where the elk bedded down in September. I could track a wounded deer through a thunderstorm, find my way out of any canyon in complete darkness, and predict weather changes by the way the pines moved in the wind. That expertise, that absolute confidence in my knowledge of those mountains, that's what makes what happened so hard to accept. Even now, dying in this bed, part of me wants to believe I hallucinated the whole thing, but I didn't. The evidence says I didn't. The 9mm film, reels, the cassette tapes, the plaster casts, they're all still there in a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Kalispell, box 447. The keys taped under the 3rd drawer of this nightstand. When I'm gone, someone from my lawyer's office will retrieve them and mail them to the address I've specified. Maybe you'll be the one to receive that package. Maybe you'll be the one to finally do something with it. The Scapegoat Wilderness covers about 240,000 acres of some of the roughest country in Montana. It sits right along the Continental Divide, all limestone cliffs and thick lodgepole pine forests that haven't seen a logging road since the Territory days. The area I patrolled included Pentagon Mountain and the surrounding drainages, places so remote that even experienced hunters would hire guides rather than risk going in alone. I loved it out there. The solitude, the pristine silence broken only by wind and wildlife, the feeling of being trusted with something precious and irreplaceable. My wife used to joke that I was more married to those mountains than to her. After what happened, after I changed, she stopped joking about it. We divorced in 1991, and I never remarried. How could I explain to anyone why I couldn't sleep without checking the locks 4 times, or why I'd never go camping again, or why the sound of wood knocking against wood would send me into a cold sweat? You have to understand, before that summer, I was the guy other rangers called when they encountered something they couldn't explain. Strange tracks, get Crenshaw, unusual predation pattern. Crenshaw will figure it out. I had a reputation for methodical scientific documentation. I didn't believe in mysteries, just puzzles that hadn't been solved yet. 20 years of that certainty, that bedrock faith in rational explanation, gone in 5 days. The evidence I collected during those 5 days was reviewed by experts who told me, off the record, that it was unprecedented and paradigm-shifting. Then those same experts signed documents saying they'd never seen it. The federal government has systems in place, protocols that activate when someone like me stumbles onto something that isn't supposed to exist. They're very good at what they do, but they're not perfect. They let me keep copies, probably figuring a discredited ranger's story would never matter. They figured wrong. The 15th of June, 1987, started like any other Monday at the Spotted Bear Ranger Station. I was at my desk by 7, working through the weekend's reports, when the call came in from a young couple who'd been backpacking near Pentagon Mountain. They'd cut their trip short, they said, because someone was poaching in the area. They'd smelled rotting meat, found what looked like a campsite, and heard gunshots in the middle of the night. But it was the woman's voice that caught my attention. She wasn't angry about the poaching. She was scared. There was something wrong about it, she kept saying. The smell was wrong, like death, but fresh. And the camps, they weren't normal camps. I pressed her for details. The structure she described didn't sound like any hunting blind or tent setup I knew. Branches woven together, she said. Almost like a basket, but 8 feet tall. Her boyfriend interrupted to add that they'd found bones scattered around, cracked open and cleaned out, but not the way bears or wolves did it. Too systematic, he said. Too deliberate. Poaching was a federal offense in the wilderness area, and with the couple's report suggesting multiple sites, I figured I was looking at an organized operation. Maybe a group taking elk or bighorn sheep for the black market. It warranted investigation, and since it was my sector, I'd be going in alone. Standard procedure for what should have been a standard patrol. I spent the rest of that Monday preparing. 5 days in the backcountry meant careful planning food, medical supplies, camping gear, documentation equipment. I cleaned and oiled my .357 revolver, though I'd only ever fired it twice in 20 years, both times mercy kills on vehicle-struck animals. Packed my casting kit for footprints, my Polaroid camera with extra film, and my cassette recorder for taking field notes. The weather forecast showed clear skies for the week, with temperatures in the 70s during the day, 40s at night. Perfect conditions. I called Patricia Holman, the district ranger, to file my patrol plan. The Pentagon Mountain's north face, working southeast through the Carmichael Basin, then back via Patrol Creek, 40 miles from the nearest road at the farthest point. She approved it without question. I'd done dozens of similar patrols. My wife was visiting her sister in Spokane, so I just left a note on the kitchen table. Back Friday. Don't forget to water the tomatoes. Tuesday morning, June 16, I loaded my gear onto Rex, my 14-year-old quarter horse, and secured the rest on Jenny, my pack mule. Rex was a steady, unflappable mountain horse who'd carried me through every kind of weather and terrain Montana could throw at us. In all our years together, I'd only seen him truly spooked twice, once by a grizzly sow with cubs, once by a lightning strike that hit a tree 50 feet away. That reliability mattered in the backcountry. The ride-in was spectacular. June in the Scapegoat meant wildflowers were exploding across the meadows. Indian paintbrush, bear grass, glacier lilies. The mountains still held snow on their north faces, feeding the creeks that ran clear and cold through the valleys. I saw a golden eagle riding thermals above Cigarette Rock, and a small herd of elk grazing in a meadow near Bighorn Creek. Everything exactly as it should be. I made camp that first night at a Forest Service site near the wilderness boundary, just a cleared spot with a fire ring and a wooden pole for hanging food. As the sun set behind the peaks, painting them pink and gold, I sat by my fire drinking coffee and reviewing my topographic maps. The couple had been vague about exact locations, but they'd mentioned distinctive landmarks: a limestone outcrop shaped like a ship's prow, a stand of ancient Douglas firs scarred by a decades-old fire. I marked possible search areas, planning to start with the drainage below Pentagon's north face. That night, I heard the usual wilderness sounds: an owl hooting, something small rustling through the underbrush, the distant howl of wolves somewhere up the valley. I slept deeply, the kind of sleep you only get in the mountains, where the air is thin and clean and your body remembers what real quiet sounds like. I had no dreams, no premonitions, just the last truly peaceful sleep of my life. Looking back now, I wonder if they were already watching me that first night, if they knew I was coming. Wednesday morning broke gray and cold, with mist hanging in the valleys like smoke. I woke to Rex nickering, nervously, pawing at the ground, where I tied him to a standing deadfall. Jenny stood rigid beside him, her ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. In 20 years of backcountry work, I'd learned to trust my animals' instincts more than my own. Something had them spooked. I broke camp quickly, skipping coffee, wanting to cover ground while the morning was still cool. The trail toward Pentagon Mountain's north face wound through dense lodgepole stands, the trees so thick in places that Rex had to push through, branches scraping against my legs. About 3 miles in, the forest opened into a small meadow, and that's where I found the first carcass. It was a mule deer doe, maybe 2 days dead based on the bloat and smell. But the condition of the body, that's what made me dismount and look closer. The hide had been peeled back in sections, almost surgical in its precision. The meat was gone, stripped clean from the bones, but not torn or shredded the way a bear would do it. The bones themselves were cracked open lengthwise, marrow scraped out. I'd seen 100 kills in my career, wolf, bear, mountain lion, but this was different. This was methodical. The femur had been used as a tool. I could see impact marks on other bones where it had been used like a hammer, cracking them open systematically. That's not something any animal does. Even chimps using rocks to crack nuts don't display this level of, I want to say planning, but that sounds crazy even now. Rex absolutely refused to approach the carcass. When I tried to lead him closer, he planted his hooves and pulled back so hard he nearly yanked the reins from my hands. I finally tied both animals to trees about 50 yards away and went back alone to document the scene. That's when I saw the tracks. The rain 2 nights before had left perfect casting conditions in the mud around the carcass. The first print I found made me think someone was playing a prank. It was huge. I laid my boot next to it for scale, and my size 11 looked like a child's shoe in comparison. But it wasn't just the size. The print showed clear toe impressions, 5 of them, with what looked like a gap between the big toe and the others, like a human foot, but wrong. Too wide, too deep, with a ridge of mud pushed up around the edges that suggested incredible weight. I followed the tracks for about 30 feet, measuring the stride. 7 feet between steps. To match that stride, I had to take ridiculous, lunging steps that left me off balance. Whatever made these tracks moved with a natural gait at that length. The implications of that made my mouth go dry. My training kicked in. Document everything. Let someone else figure out what it means. I got out my casting kit and mixed the plaster, working quickly, but carefully. While the first cast set, I photographed the scene from every angle, burning through half a roll of film. The Polaroids showed the tracks clearly, though they didn't capture the sense of wrongness I felt looking at them. The tracks led north, deeper into the forest, toward a drainage I knew fed into Carmichael Basin. Every instinct told me not to follow them, but I had a job to do, and at that point I was still telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe someone with those novelty BIGFOOT feet you could order from the backs of magazines, playing an elaborate hoax. The surgical precision of the carcass, though that didn't fit a hoax, I loaded the dried cast carefully into my saddlebags. Rex tried to bite me when I untied him, something he'd never done before. His whole body was trembling. Jenny wasn't much better, the whites of her eyes showing. I had to spend 10 minutes calming them before I could mount up. We followed the tracks for another mile before Rex simply stopped. No amount of spurring would make him go forward. When I dismounted to lead him, he reared up, something he'd never done in all our years together, and his hoof caught me in the shoulder, spinning me into the dirt. I sat there, shoulder throbbing, watching my steady, reliable partner transform into a terrified animal. That's when I noticed the silence. Complete, absolute silence. The silence was wrong in a way that made something primitive in my brain scream danger. No birds, no insects, not even wind in the trees. It was like the entire forest was holding its breath. I stood there, shoulder aching from Rex's hoof, trying to process what I was seeing ahead through the thinning pines. At first, I thought it was a hunting blind, maybe one of those elaborate setups poachers use for long-term camps. But as I got closer, leaving the terrified animals tied back where they'd stopped, I realized no human had built this thing. It stood about 8 feet tall, constructed from lodgepole pines bent and woven together while they were still green and flexible. The weaving pattern was complex, almost artistic, with smaller branches threaded through to create walls. Mud had been packed into the gaps, mixed with what looked like pine pitch to make it weatherproof. The entrance was on the south side, facing away from the prevailing winds. Smart. I had to duck to get inside, and what I found there changed everything I thought I knew about what lived in these mountains. The floor was covered with cedar boughs, layered thick and fresh enough that the smell still hung in the air. Cedar doesn't grow at this elevation. Whatever built this had carried it up from at least 2,000 feet below. In one corner, I found tools. Actual tools. A piece of antler, worn smooth and shaped into a point, probably for digging. Stones that had been chipped to create cutting edges, not randomly but with clear intention. And bones, deer and elk mostly, that had been worked into shapes I couldn't identify but that were obviously deliberate. The walls were what really got to me. Scratched into the woven branches were patterns. Not random claw marks, but organized symbols. 3 parallel lines crossed by a diagonal, circles with dots in the center. Something that looked almost like a map, with wavy lines that might have been water and triangular shapes that could represent mountains. I photographed everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to brace the camera against the wall. In what I'd call the sleeping area, the cedar boughs were arranged in a depression shaped to fit something large. Very large. I laid down in it to gauge the size, and my 6-foot frame didn't come close to filling it. Whatever slept here was at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The boughs still held an impression, and when I put my hand in it, warmth radiated up. Fresh warmth, recent warmth. That's when the smell hit me, musky, animal, but with something else. Like wet dog mixed with something almost human. The kind of smell that triggers ancient fear responses, that makes your body prepare to run before your mind even processes the threat. It was everywhere suddenly, so strong it made my eyes water. I backed out of the structure slowly, every nerve firing. The forest remained dead silent. No Rex nickering in the distance, no Jenny braying. Nothing. I turned in a slow circle, camera ready, trying to spot movement in the trees. The shadows between the lodge poles seemed deeper than they should be, and every trunk could have been hiding something. I found more structures, 3 of them, arranged in a rough triangle about 50 yards apart. Each slightly different but built with the same technique, the same intelligence. One had what looked like a storage area, with strips of dried meat hanging from woven grass ropes. Another contained stones arranged in patterns on the floor, almost like a game board. This wasn't a single creature, this was a family group, maybe more. They had culture, they had intelligence. They had been living here, invisible, for who knows how long. And based on the fresh warmth in that bedding, they were probably watching me right now. I made it back to Rex and Jenny just as the sun was starting to angle low through the trees. They were exactly where I'd left them, but Rex had rubbed his face raw against the tree trying to break free, leaving bloody marks on the bark. Jenny had backed as far as her lead would allow, the rope taut as a guitar string. I've never seen animals that terrified. I made camp early, choosing a spot on a small rise with good sight lines in all directions. My hands shook as I gathered firewood, piling twice as much as I'd need for a normal night. The silence had broken about a mile from those structures, birds and insects returning gradually like someone slowly turning up the volume on a radio. But I knew that could change. As darkness fell, I built my fire higher than usual, fed it until it threw light a good 20 feet in all directions. I hobbled Rex and Jenny close, inside the ring of firelight, though they fought me the whole time. My shoulder was turning purple where Rex had kicked me, and every movement sent sharp pain down my arm. I was heating a can of beans over the fire when the first knock came. It was deliberate, 3 measured raps against wood, maybe 50 feet out in the darkness. I froze, can suspended over the flames. 30 seconds later, another series of knocks from a different direction. Then another. They were circling my camp, communicating. I set down the beans and reached for my cassette recorder, pressing record just as a new pattern started. Knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. From the east. Then the same pattern repeated from the north. They were talking to each other. About me. My hand moved to my 357, but I knew how useless it would be. If these things could build structures and make tools, if they could communicate with this level of sophistication, then I was dealing with something far beyond a simple animal threat. I was in their territory, uninvited, and they were deciding what to do about it. I tried an experiment. I picked up a stick and knocked it against a log. 2 knocks, a pause, then 3. The forest went silent for maybe 10 seconds. Then, from directly behind me, close enough that I could hear the wood grain splinter. Knock, knock, pause. Knock, knock, knock. They were mimicking me, learning. The knocking continued for an hour, patterns growing more complex. Sometimes it sounded like Morse code, sometimes like drums. Once, I swear I heard something that sounded almost like laughter, a rhythmic pattern that had a kind of humor to it, if that makes any sense. The recorder captured all of it, 90 minutes of audio that would later be analyzed by linguistics experts who refused to go on record about what they found. Around midnight, Rex snapped his hobble and bolted into the darkness. I heard him crashing through the underbrush, terrified whinnying growing fainter. Jenny tried to follow, but her rope held. She stood there, trembling so hard I could hear her teeth clicking, foam dripping from her mouth. Then came the vocalizations. Low, rumbling sounds that seemed to come from everywhere at once, not quite animal, not quite human. Like someone with the deepest voice imaginable, trying to speak through water. The sounds had patterns, cadences that rose and fell like conversation. One voice would rumble for 10 or 15 seconds, then another would respond from a different direction. I sat by that fire, feeding it constantly, my revolver in my lap, recording everything. At some point, I don't know when I realized I was crying. Not from fear exactly, but from the overwhelming wrongness of it all. Everything I thought I knew about these mountains, about what was possible, was crumbling around me. Just before dawn, something flew out of the darkness and landed in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. A piece of venison, fresh killed, still warm. A gift, or a message. Dawn came gray and cold, mist rising from the creek below my camp like steam. I hadn't slept, couldn't. I'd spent the night feeding that fire, listening to the forest return to normal, as whatever had been out there withdrew. The piece of venison they'd thrown still lay at the edge of the fire ring, flies beginning to gather on it. Fresh killed, like I said. The meat still had warmth to it when it landed. I found Rex 2 miles north, following Jenny's panicked braying. My reliable mountain horse, the one who'd carried me through blizzards and river crossings without hesitation, lay broken in a small clearing. His neck was twisted at an impossible angle, turned almost completely around. No claw marks, no bite wounds, no sign of feeding. Just that grotesque angle that spoke of massive hands and terrible strength. The thing is, Rex weighed about 1,200 pounds. To break a horse's neck like that, to twist it with such force, I couldn't stop doing the math in my head. The amount of strength required was beyond anything I could rationalize. This wasn't done in a struggle either. There were no signs Rex had fought. It was quick, deliberate, a message. The tracks around Rex's body told a story I didn't want to read. One set, the massive prints I'd been following, approached from the east. Rex's hoof prints showed him running hard, panicked, straight into the clearing. The large prints moved to intercept, no running, just long, steady strides. Then Rex's tracks just stopped. And those other prints stood there, right beside him, for what looked like several minutes based on how deep they'd pressed into the earth. Standing, watching, waiting for me to find this. I need you to understand something. In 20 years of ranging, I'd never lost a horse, never had one injured beyond a few scrapes. Rex had been with me for 6 of those years. He was as much my partner as any human I'd worked with. Seeing him there, discarded like a broken toy, something in me shifted. The fear was still there, but anger started mixing with it. I went back to Jenny, who was trembling so hard she could barely stand. When I tried to load Rex's saddle onto her, I couldn't leave good tack behind. She went wild, bucking and screaming until I gave up. I turned her loose, watching her flee down the trail toward civilization. Maybe she'd make it. Maybe someone would find her and know something had gone wrong. My food situation was now critical. When I checked the cache I'd hung the night before, 15 feet up a pine, properly secured with a bear-proof knot, I found the rope had been untied, not chewed through, not broken, untied. The knot was complex, one that took me years to learn, lying in a neat coil at the base of the tree. The bag had been opened, its contents sorted. The canned goods sat in a pile, unopened. The coffee, sugar, and salt were scattered on the ground. But the dried fruit, the jerky, the trail mix, gone. They'd also taken my backup batteries. All of them. The ones for my radio, my flashlight, even the extras for my cassette recorder. They'd left the radio itself, the flashlight, the recorder, just took the power sources, like they understood exactly how our technology worked and how to disable it without destroying it. The realization hit me hard. I was 40 miles from the nearest road, my transportation dead or fled, my communication equipment useless, and something with human-level intelligence but far greater physical capabilities was actively managing my situation. They weren't trying to kill me, the venison gift suggested that. They were trying to control me, to move me where they wanted me to go. When I checked my map, I saw it clearly. Every direction they'd blocked led towards safety. Every path they'd left open led deeper into the mountains, toward a canyon system I'd never explored. I had two choices: try to force my way out through the blocked routes, or follow the path they'd left open. Pride said, fight through. Survival instinct said that was suicide. But there was something else too, a ranger's curiosity that had gotten me into trouble before. They wanted me to go into that canyon. Why? The trail they'd herded me toward was barely a game path, winding down through dense lodgepole stands toward hell-roaring canyon. I'd seen it on maps but never explored it. Too steep, too remote. No reason to go there. As I descended, I found more evidence of their intelligence. Trees across my back trail fell with thunderous crashes every few hundred yards. Not windfall. I could hear them coming down, timed to my progress. When I tried to double back once, to test them, a massive pine dropped so close the branches whipped across my face. By noon, I was deep in the canyon, following a creek that didn't appear on any of my maps. The walls rose 500 feet on either side, gray limestone streaked with water stains. And everywhere, signs of them. Saplings bent and twisted into shapes that hurt to look at triangles, interwoven with circles, patterns that seemed almost mathematical. At a creek crossing, river stones had been stacked into cairns, but not random ones. They increased in size sequentially, each one exactly a foot taller than the last. 7 of them, marking what looked like a boundary. Beyond the cairns, the forest changed. The trees here were ancient, never logged, some Douglas firs probably 400 years old, and carved into them, at about 8 feet high, were more symbols. Not fresh, these had healed over, bark growing back around them. Years old. Decades, maybe. The same patterns I'd seen in the shelter, but more complex. One sequence repeated over and over. 3 vertical lines, a circle with a dot, then something that looked like a mountain with a line through it. My radio, dead since the night before, suddenly crackled to life. Just static at first, then something else. A pattern in the static, rhythmic, deliberate. I tried transmitting, Ranger Station, this is, Crenshaw, emergency, over, nothing. But the patterns in the static continued, almost like the knocking from the night before, but electronic. They were using my radio to communicate with me. I found their main territory late that afternoon. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, maybe 200 acres, completely enclosed by cliff walls. A place that didn't exist on any map. Hot springs steamed at the north end, creating a microclimate. The vegetation was wrong for this elevation, ferns and moss that should have been 2,000 feet lower, and structures, not just 1 or 2, but dozens. Some built into the cliff faces, others freestanding. A village. I tried to photograph it, but my camera jammed. The film wouldn't advance. When I opened it to check, the film was exposed, ruined, even though I'd been careful. Every shot I'd taken that day, gone. But the cassette recorder still worked, and I narrated everything I saw, whispering into the microphone. That's when I saw the bones, arranged in patterns around the largest structure, skulls of various animals, deer, elk, bear, mountain lion, and others I couldn't identify. Some looked almost human but wrong, the jaw too heavy, the skull too elongated. Old bones weathered white by seasons, offerings, maybe, or warnings. the silence was absolute again. They were close, probably watching from the structures of the trees. I could feel their eyes on me, evaluating, deciding. The sun was dropping behind the western cliffs, shadows filling the valley like dark water. I had nowhere to run now. This is where they'd wanted me, and this is where I'd have to face whatever came next. I made camp at the valley's edge, my back against a limestone cliff, fire built in a natural alcove that would reflect heat and light forward. No point in trying to hide, they knew exactly where I was. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes. The hot springs sent steam drifting across the valley, like fog, creating shapes that weren't there, shadows that moved wrong. The first stone landed 10 feet from my fire at full dark, not thrown hard, just tossed. A river rock about the size of my fist. Then another, closer. Then one that rolled right up to my boots. I picked it up, smooth granite, warm to the touch like it had been held. When I set it aside, another immediately took its place. They were playing with me, testing. For 2 hours, the stones came intermittently, sometimes from the left, sometimes the right, a few from directly behind that must have been dropped from the cliff above, each one placed with precision, creating a rough circle around my position. I counted 43 stones before they stopped. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, circling just outside the firelight. The ground vibrated with each impact. Whatever was out there wanted me to know how big it was, how easily it could crush me if it chose. The footsteps would approach, pause, just at the edge of visibility, then retreat. This went on for an hour, maybe more. My cassette recorder captured it all, the rhythmic thud, the breathing that sounded like a bellows, the occasional grunt or sigh. Around midnight, the silhouette appeared. It stood between me and the dying fire, impossibly tall, shoulders broader than any humans could be. The proportions were all wrong, arms too long, torso too thick, head sitting forward on the neck like it was perpetually leaning in to look at something. It just stood there, swaying slightly, for 5 minutes. 10. 15. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. And part of me, the scientist, the ranger, the curious human, wanted to see, needed to see. The creature moved closer, still backlit, and squatted down about 20 feet away. Even squatting, it was taller than me standing. It picked up one of the stones it had thrown and began tapping it against another, rhythmic, complex. Then it stopped and waited. I understood. It wanted me to respond. With a shaking hand, I picked up 2 stones and repeated the pattern as best I could. The creature made a sound, not quite a laugh, but something expressing satisfaction, approval. It tapped out a new pattern, more complex. I tried to follow. We went back and forth like this for an hour, the patterns growing increasingly sophisticated. Then it began to vocalize. Low rumbles that rose and fell like speech, but in no language I'd ever heard. The sounds came from deep in its chest, resonating in frequencies I felt more than heard. My recorder was still running, picking up these impossible sounds. Later analysis would show structures linguists couldn't explain, patterns that suggested grammar, syntax, meaning, but in a format human vocal cords couldn't replicate. The creature stood suddenly, and I saw its full height, at least 8 feet, maybe more. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its size, circling my position again, but closer now, close enough that I could smell it, musky, wild, but with something else, like sage and pine pitch and something anciently animal. It stopped directly in front of me, maybe 15 feet away, still just a massive shadow against the firelight. And then it spoke. Not the rumbles from before, but an attempt at human speech. Broken, harsh, like someone with damaged vocal cords trying to form words they'd only heard, never practiced. You, goo, leave. Leave. It was telling me to leave. Something snapped inside me then. 3 days of terror, my horse dead, being herded like cattle through these mountains, and now this thing was trying to speak to me. Exhaustion, fear, and a kind of desperate curiosity overrode every bit of common sense I had left. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, hand instinctively moving to the 357 on my hip, though I knew it was useless. I can't leave, I said, speaking clearly, like I was talking to a child, or someone who didn't speak English. You broke my horse, destroyed my supplies. I'm 40 miles from help. The shadow shifted, and I heard what might have been frustration, a huffing sound like a bear makes, but with more complexity to it. It moved closer, and my flashlight was right there by my pack. Before I could think better of it, I grabbed it and clicked it on. The beam hit the creature full in the face, and time stopped. The face was. I still struggle to describe it. Imagine a gorilla's facial structure but stretched vertically, with a heavier brow ridge that shadowed deep-set eyes. The nose was flat, almost human in shape but wider, with nostrils that flared as it breathed. The mouth was lipless, showing teeth that were human-like but larger, made for grinding and tearing in equal measure. Dark, reddish-brown hair covered everything except the palms, the soles of the feet, and parts of the face. But it was the eyes that held me. Brown, but with flecks of gold that caught the light. Intelligent. Undeniably, impossibly intelligent. They showed surprise at the sudden light, then annoyance, then something that looked almost like resignation. This wasn't an animal I was looking at. This was a person different from me, but a person nonetheless. It raised one massive hand to shield its eyes from the beam, and I saw the palm, clearly black skin. Lined like a human's, but thicker, with fingers that had the same proportions as mine but scaled up to impossible size. It could have crushed my skull with that hand. Instead, it made a gesture palm out, pushing down. Universal. Lower the light. I did, angling the beam toward its chest instead. The creature's breathing was visible in the cold air, steady and controlled. It looked at me for a long moment, then made that sound again. Leave. I understand, I said. You want me to leave, but I need help. Food. A way out. I mimed eating, then walking, hoping something would translate. The creature tilted its head, considering. Then it turned and made a different sound, not directed at me, but calling out into the darkness. An answer came immediately, from at least 3 different directions. More of them. A whole family group, maybe more, had been watching this entire exchange. A smaller figure emerged from the shadows, still 7 feet tall, but more slender, moving with a different gait. Female, I realized. She, and somehow I was certain it was a she, came close enough that I could see her in the flashlight's periphery. Her face was narrower, her hair lighter in color, and she moved with more caution than the male. She carried something in her hands. My pack, the one I'd lost when Rex bolted. She set it down about 10 feet from me and backed away. Inside, I'd later find my food supplies replenished with dried meat, roots, and berries. My radio batteries were there too, though they'd been partially drained. Enough power for 1 transmission, maybe 2. The male made a rumbling sound to the female, and she responded with a higher-pitched variation. They were discussing me, about what to do with me. The male gestured at me, then at the trail leading out of the valley, the same gesture he'd made with his vocalizations. Leave. But then he did something I'll never forget. He pointed at his eyes, then at mine. Then he covered his eyes with both hands. He pointed at the structures in the valley, the bones, the symbols carved in the trees, and covered his eyes again. Finally, he pointed at his mouth and made an X gesture across it with one finger. See nothing, say nothing. He was offering me a deal. They'd let me leave, even help me leave, but I had to keep their secret. I nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact with the creature. Yes, I said. I understand. I'll say nothing. The male studied me for another long moment, those gold-flecked eyes seeming to look right through me, evaluating whether I could be trusted. Then he turned and walked back toward the structures, the female following. But before they disappeared completely, the male stopped and made one more sound, softer this time, almost gentle. Goo. Sun up. Leave at sunrise. I had until then. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat by my dying fire, the replenished pack beside me, listening to them moving through their village. Normal sounds, footsteps, low vocalizations, the creak of their structures as they moved through them. Domestic sounds, family sounds. At one point, I heard what could only be described as laughter, high-pitched squeals that had to be young ones playing. As the eastern sky began to lighten, I packed up my camp. My hands moved automatically while my mind tried to process what I'd witnessed. The radio came to life suddenly, clear signal. Patricia Holman's voice cutting through. "Crenshaw, this is base. We've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Over." I held the transmitter for a long moment, remembering the creature's gesture. "Say nothing." "Base, this is Crenshaw. Equipment failure. I'm heading back. Trail junction at Patrol Creek. Request pickup. Over. Copy that." "You okay out there, Tom? You sound strange." "Just tired. Dead horse. Had to hike out. See you in 6 hours." As I headed down the trail, I stopped at a large pine near the valley entrance. Carved fresh into the bark, at my eye level, not 8 feet up, was a new symbol. A stick figure human with an arrow pointing away from the mountain. Below it, that same mountain symbol with a line through it, and at the bottom, freshly scratched that morning, an X. The message was clear: leave and never come back. 20 yards down the trail, I found something else. A perfect plaster cast of a footprint, my own work from 3 days earlier, sitting on a flat rock with something beside it, a chunk of reddish-brown hair caught on a branch, deliberately placed. Evidence. They were giving me proof, but also showing me they knew exactly what I'd been doing. They understood our science, our need for physical evidence, and they were allowing me this much. A gift, or maybe insurance, that I'd be believed just enough to be dismissed as another crackpot. The hike out was surreal. Every obstacle from the day before had been cleared. Fallen trees had been moved aside, their massive trunks shifted by incredible strength. Fresh blazes on trees marked the easiest path. At the halfway point, I found a small pile of berries on a rock, still covered with morning dew. They were watching, making sure I actually left. My radio crackled again 3 hours into my hike. This time it wasn't the base station. It was that pattern in the static again, rhythmic and deliberate. Then, cutting through the white noise, a single word in that broken, harsh attempt at human speech. Good. When I reached the trail junction at Patrol Creek, a Forest Service truck was waiting. Jenny stood in a horse trailer, still trembling but alive. She'd been found wandering near the ranger station. Patricia Holman stepped out of the truck, her face a careful mask of professional concern. "Tom," she said, looking at my haggard face, torn clothes, the wild look that must have been in my eyes. "We need to talk about what happened out there." But behind her, leaning against another vehicle, was a man in a dark suit I'd never seen before. He wasn't Forest Service. The way he watched me, cataloging every detail, I knew exactly what he was. They'd been waiting for someone to come back with a story like mine. The debriefing took place in a conference room at the ranger station that I'd never seen used before. Patricia Holman sat on one side of the table, the man in the dark suit on the other. He introduced himself only as Mr. Davidson from Interior. No first name, no specific department. His credentials, when he flashed them, were too quick to read fully. I laid out my evidence on the table: the plaster cast, the hair sample, my cassette recordings, the Polaroid photographs that had survived. My hands were steady as I set each item down, but inside, I was calculating. How much to tell, what to hold back. The creature's gesture kept replaying in my mind. See nothing, say nothing. "Let's start from the beginning," Davidson said, pulling out a notebook. "The hiker's report about poaching. I told him about finding the carcass, the surgical precision of the butchering. I described the tracks, showed them the cast. When I played the audio of the tree knocks, Davidson's expression never changed, but Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She'd heard sounds like this before I could see it in her eyes. "What do you think made these sounds?" Davidson asked. "I don't know," I lied. "Could be wood knocking in the wind, could be someone playing a prank. The woods do strange things with sound." Davidson smiled, a thin, knowing expression. "And the structures you photographed?" Most of the photos were ruined, but 3 had survived, showing the woven shelters. "Elaborate hoax, maybe," I said. "Or transients living off-grid. Wouldn't be the first time we found people trying to disappear in the wilderness." "People with 18-inch feet?" Davidson pulled out a file I hadn't seen him bring in. Inside were photographs, not mine, but older ones. Black and white. Similar tracks, similar structures. This is from 1973. And this, another photo, 1968. Same area. Patricia looked shocked. She hadn't known about these. But Davidson was watching me, not her. There are protocols, Mr. Crenshaw, he said softly. Procedures that date back to 1947. When someone reports certain types of encounters, we respond. We investigate, we classify, and we ensure that public safety is maintained. Public safety, I asked. Panic prevention, he clarified. Can you imagine what would happen if people believed there were unknown primates in these mountains? The hunters, the trophy seekers, the scientists who'd flood this wilderness? He leaned forward. The ecological damage alone would be catastrophic. He was right, and I knew it. But that wasn't all he was worried about. Davidson opened another folder, this one marked with classification stamps. The hair sample you collected will need to send it for analysis. The audio too. Your photographs and cast, all of it becomes classified material. He slid a document across the table. This is a standard NDA. Sign it, and you keep your job, your pension, your reputation. Refuse. He shrugged. I read the document. It was comprehensive, threatening, and absolutely binding. Any discussion of anomalous wildlife encounters would result in immediate termination, loss of pension, and potential federal prosecution under the Espionage Act. I need to know, I said, not picking up the pen yet. Are they real? Davidson and Patricia exchanged glances. Finally, Davidson spoke. Mr. Crenshaw, what you encountered was likely a combination of stress, equipment failures, and misidentified wildlife. Black bears, when standing upright, can appear quite large. Their behavior can seem almost human-like. That's not what I asked. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Davidson leaned back in his chair. Sign the document, Mr. Crenshaw. File your report stating you found evidence of illegal hunting, nothing more. Transfer to another district if you feel it necessary. And never, ever go back to that area. It's being designated as a special management zone. Patricia added quietly, ecological research, no unauthorized access. I signed the document. What choice did I have? But as Davidson collected my evidence, I kept thinking about that final gift on the trail, the cast and hair they'd left for me. They'd known this would happen. They'd known I'd need proof, even if I could never use it. Davidson stood to leave, then paused at the door. Mr. Crenshaw? That word you claim you heard, leave? Next time, I suggest you listen. There would be no next time. We all knew that. 3 weeks after signing that NDA, I got a call at home from someone who wouldn't identify herself. Check your mail, she said, then hung up. Inside was a manila envelope with no return address, postmarked from Boise. The contents changed everything I thought I knew about what the government was hiding. Lab results, stamped classified, and then photocopied anyway. The hair sample I'd collected showed DNA markers that didn't match any known primate species, but the relationship to humans was undeniable, somewhere between 97 and 98% genetic similarity. Closer than chimps to humans, but divergent in ways that suggested separation hundreds of thousands of years ago. The report's conclusion had been redacted, but someone had written in pen beside it. Minimum viable population requires 500 plus individuals. 500. Not one creature, not a small family group, a breeding population. The audio analysis was even more disturbing. Linguistics experts from 3 universities had reviewed the recordings without being told their source. All 3 independently concluded the vocalizations showed structured communication consistent with primitive language development. One professor noted patterns suggesting not just communication, but dialect. Variations, meaning multiple groups with slightly different languages. At the bottom of the stack was a photograph I hadn't taken, black and white, dated 1962. It showed 3 Forest Service rangers standing beside a captured creature smaller than what I'd encountered, maybe 6 feet tall, clearly dead. One of the rangers in the photo looked familiar. It took me a moment to realize why he had my father's eyes. The same man who disappeared in these mountains that same year, officially listed as a climbing accident. I drove to Kalispell the next morning and found Doug Whitman's wilderness supply store tucked between a diner and a hardware shop. Doug had been a ranger at Glacier National Park until 1985. When I mentioned Pentagon Mountain, he locked the front door and led me to a back room. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. Doug's encounter had been different but equally profound. He'd been investigating missing hikers when he'd found a cave system that showed clear signs of habitation tools, preserved food, even what appeared to be crude paintings on the walls. He'd been confronted by 3 creatures, all female he thought, who'd surrounded him but didn't attack. They'd led him out of the cave and away from the area, almost gently, like they were escorting a lost child. The feds showed up within 6 hours, he said. Same deal as you sign or lose everything, but I kept copies of everything. He showed me a map on his wall, red pins marking locations. 17 confirmed encounters between 1,960 and 1,990, all rangers or Forest Service, all silenced. He'd tracked down 12 of the witnesses. 3 had died in accidents within a year of their encounters. 4 had been transferred to posts as far from Montana as possible, Florida, Arizona, Maine. The others, like him, lived quietly with their secrets. Pension checks depended on their silence. But here's what really got me, Doug said, pulling out a Forest Service planning map from 1991. The Pentagon Mountain area and surroundings had been marked as a special management zone, just as Davidson had promised. But the boundaries were huge, nearly 500,000 acres. They're not just hiding them, he said. They're managing them, like an endangered species that officially doesn't exist. I showed him the photo of my father. Doug studied it for a long time. That middle ranger is Jim Hendricks, Carl's father. Carl Hendricks, the ranger who died in a car accident in 1990 after threatening to go public. The third one is Robert McAvoy. He became Deputy Director of Interior in 1978, retired to D.C., with full honors in 1985. So they've known since at least 1962, I said. Doug laughed bitterly. Tom, they've known since Lewis and Clark. I found journal entries in the National Archives before they were reclassified. Expedition members reporting wild men of tremendous size in exactly this area. The government hadn't just been hiding them. They'd been hiding them for over 2 centuries. Doug introduced me to Annie Redfern over a crackling phone line from Florida. She'd insisted on a payphone, no home lines, no possibility of recording. Her voice was tired, cautious, but when I mentioned the vocalizations I'd heard, she came alive. They sang, she said. That's what I could never put in the official report. They actually sang. Her encounter in 1988 had occurred while she was documenting rare plant species in the same canyon system I'd been herded into. She'd heard what sounded like voices in harmony, multiple tones creating something between human singing and whale song. When she'd approached, she'd found 5 of them adults and juveniles in what appeared to be a teaching session. The young ones were practicing sounds while an elder corrected them. They had language, Tom, real language. The little ones were learning it like human children learn to speak. Annie had been spotted and surrounded, but like Doug, she hadn't been harmed. They'd examined her equipment, particularly interested in her camera and field guides. One of the juveniles had tried to mimic her words when she'd spoken to them. They'd kept her for 6 hours, seemingly as curious about her as she was about them, before escorting her out. The government response was immediate, she said. They already had a containment protocol ready. They knew exactly what I'd seen because they'd been monitoring the population for decades. Through Annie, I connected with 2 other witnesses who'd talk. Each story was similar intelligent creatures, clear communication attempts, nonviolent encounters that ended with the witness being escorted out. And always, the rapid government response, the classification, the threats wrapped in bureaucratic language. One former ranger who insisted I only identify him as Robert told me something that still haunts me. I found a burial ground in 1983. 23 graves, marked with stones, some decorated with flowers, and carved totems. They mourn their dead, Tom. They have rituals. They might even have religion. The special management zone wasn't just about hiding them, it was a reservation. An unmarked, unmapped reservation for a species that couldn't be acknowledged without rewriting everything we thought we knew about human evolution and North American history. I obtained, through channels I won't discuss, a partial copy of an Interior Department memo from 1991. It discussed management protocols for indigenous primate populations and mentioned population estimates. Between 800 and 1,200 individuals in 7 family groups across Montana, Idaho, and parts of Canada. The memo discussed providing habitat corridors and minimal intervention protocols while maintaining absolute information containment. They weren't just hiding individual creatures, they were managing an entire species in secret. Carl Hendricks had discovered this before he died. Doug had his final letter, sent the day before his accident. They're not animals. They're people. Different from us, but people. And we're keeping them prisoner in their own land while denying they exist. How is that different from what we did to every other indigenous population? That's when I understood why Carl had died. He hadn't just threatened to reveal their existence, he threatened to reveal the moral implications of the cover-up. A sentient species, possibly with language and culture, being denied recognition, protection, and rights. The lawsuits alone would be devastating. The ethical implications were staggering. But there was something else in Carl's files, something that made my blood run cold. Population reports showing decline. In 1970, estimates suggested 2,000 individuals. By 1980, 1,500. By 1990, barely 1,000. They were dying out, and the government was documenting their extinction while denying they existed. Doug looked at me across his map of red pins. That's why they're getting more aggressive, more visible. They're desperate. That word you heard, leave? That wasn't a threat, Tom. It was a plea. I thought about the creature's eyes, that gold-flecked intelligence, the attempt at human speech. They knew what we were. They knew what was happening to them. And they were running out of time. The years that followed my encounter were a slow unraveling of everything I'd built my life around. Patricia Holman transferred me to a desk position in Missoula, processing backcountry permits and managing paperwork, glorified exile for a field ranger. I took it without complaint. The alternative was worse, and we both knew it. My wife, Linda, tried to understand at first. She could see something had broken in me during that patrol. But how could I explain the night terrors, where I'd wake up hearing that voice, leave, echoing through our bedroom? How could I tell her why I'd installed 3 deadbolts on every door, why I couldn't walk in the woods anymore without constantly looking over my shoulder, why the sound of wood knocking against wood would send me into a cold panic? I started drinking. Not heavily at first, just enough bourbon each night to blur the edges of memory. But tolerance builds, and soon I was killing a bottle every 2 days. Linda found me one morning, passed out at my desk, surrounded by maps of Pentagon Mountain, red circles drawn around areas I was forbidden to enter. The cassette player was running on a loop, those vocalizations playing over and over. She packed her things that afternoon. "You're not the man I married," she said at the door. "That mountain took something from you, Tom, and you're never getting it back." She was right. The divorce was finalized in March of 1991. The nightmares were specific and recurring. I'd be back in that valley, but this time I understood their language. They were telling me their history, how they'd hidden for centuries, watched European settlement creep across their territory, learned to avoid us as we grew more numerous and dangerous. In the dreams, they showed me their children, taught them to fear the small, hairless creatures with their loud machines and deadly weapons. They showed me their elders dying without passing on crucial knowledge because there was nowhere safe left to gather, to teach, to be. I tried therapy once, through the Forest Service Employee Assistance Program. The psychiatrist, Dr. Marcus Webb, listened to my carefully edited story about work-related stress and wildlife encounter trauma. He prescribed pills that made the dreams worse. Now they were vivid, technicolor, so real I could smell the sage and pine pitch. I stopped after 3 sessions when he mentioned my case to a colleague who happened to work for the Department of Interior. My prescription was immediately changed to something stronger, something that made me compliant and foggy. I flushed them all. The obsession grew. Every spare moment was spent researching, correlating, trying to understand. I learned about the Patterson-Gimlin film, how government agents had visited both men within days. I found newspaper archives from the 1800s describing wildman encounters in exactly the areas that were now special management zones. I discovered that 3 prominent primatologists had been offered massive federal grants in the 1,970 seconds to stop their research into cryptid primates and focus on established species. In 1993, I broke my silence with someone I shouldn't. Have a journalist named David Price who'd been sniffing around the edges of the story. Within a week, my pension was under review for irregularities. David's editor killed his story. David himself was arrested 2 months later for possession of drugs that he swore weren't his. He got 5 years. I got the message. But the real cost wasn't the career or the marriage or the threats. It was the knowledge I carried. In quiet moments, usually at 3 a.m. when the bourbon had worn off and sleep wouldn't come, I'd think about that creature's eyes. The intelligence there, the sadness. They knew what we'd done to every other indigenous population we'd encountered. They'd learned from our history to stay hidden, stay myth. But hiding was killing them slowly, generation by generation, their world shrinking until even myth wouldn't be enough to save them. I marked the years by the reports that filtered through Doug's network. 1,995. A clear-cut logging operation mysteriously approved right up time to the special management zone boundary. 1,998. 3 juveniles spotted near a highway, nearly causing accidents before disappearing a sign their territory was being squeezed. 2001. After 9/11, surveillance equipment installed throughout the zones, officially for national security, but we knew better. 2003. The last confirmed sighting by a civilian before the areas were completely locked down. I kept the evidence, though, in that safety deposit box, wrapped in plastic, sealed against time. The original cassette, 3 Polaroids that survived, a vial with 3 strands of reddish-brown hair, and something I never reported, a gift I found in my pack later, placed there while I slept that last night in their valley, a small stone, perfectly round, with a symbol carved into it. The same symbol they'd carved on that final tree, a human figure with an arrow pointing away. Sometimes I'd take it out and hold it, wondering if they remembered me, wondering if any of them were still alive, wondering if I'd made the right choice to keep their secret. I hadn't. I know that now. Silence equaled extinction. But breaking that silence might have meant something worse, a final, violent end instead of a slow fade into oblivion. There were no good choices, only degrees of tragedy. The morphine is wearing off now. The nurse will come soon with another dose. But before she does, I need to tell you the rest. About what happened to the others who knew. About the files Doug hid. About why I'm really breaking my silence now, 35 years too late. The satellite images arrived last month, slipped under my hospice room door in an envelope marked only with my name. Current photos, dated October 2022, showing the special management zone from above. The forest was still there, but something was wrong. Large sections had been cleared, not logged, but burned. Controlled burns, precise, surgical, and in the cleared areas, nothing. No structures, no trails, no signs of habitation. They're gone. Doug Whitman died in 2019, supposedly of a heart attack. But his son called me, said Doug had been healthy as a horse until 2 federal agents visited him the week before. Annie Redfern passed in 2020, COVID on the death certificate, though she'd been isolated in rural Florida. Carl Hendricks's widow sent me his hidden files before she died with a note. They're watching everyone who knows. Your cancer is the only reason you're still alive. Maybe she's right. Maybe this pancreatic cancer is natural, or maybe it's not. Doesn't matter now. What matters is what's in those files. The Interior Department has been documenting the decline since 1962. Population estimates, birth rates, genetic diversity studies, all classified beyond even what most intelligence agencies can access. The last official count, from 2018, suggested fewer than 200 individuals remained. The genetic bottleneck was irreversible. They were managing an extinction, not a population. But there's more. In 2020, something changed. The special management zones were transferred from Interior to Defense. The classification level went from secret to something that doesn't officially exist. The few rangers with access reported finding abandoned structures, cold fire pits, scattered tools. But no bodies, no bones, just absence. The official conclusion, hidden in acronyms and bureaucratic language, was successful voluntary relocation. But relocated where? The memo referenced Operation Avalon and Site 47, but nothing else. Doug's son traced shipping manifests showing refrigerated containers, the kind used for biological specimens, moving from Montana to somewhere in Alaska, then off the grid entirely. I think they took them. All of them. Somewhere beyond even the reach of curious rangers and persistent journalists. Maybe to preserve them, maybe to study them. Maybe just to solve a problem that had become too visible, too risky in an age of satellites and smartphones and social media. The coordinates I'm giving you, 47.5 degrees north, 113.0 degrees west, that's where it started. The valley where they lived, where they sang, where they tried to teach us their language. Go there if you want, but you'll find nothing. The hot springs have been capped, the ancient trees cut down. Even the stones they stacked have been removed. It's as if they never existed, but they did exist. They do exist. Somewhere. The evidence in Box 447 at First National Bank in Kalispell proves it. The recordings, the photos, the hair samples, they're all there, along with everything Doug collected, Carl documented, Annie preserved. Enough proof to demolish the official story, if anyone's brave enough to use it. My lawyer has instructions to send copies to 12 different journalists, 6 universities, and 3 congressional oversight committees when I die. Maybe it'll amount to nothing, files lost, hard drives corrupted, people suddenly uninterested. They're good at making things disappear. But maybe, just maybe, someone will listen. Someone will care. I think about them every day now, as this cancer eats through what's left of me. I wonder if they remember us, wherever they are. If they tell stories about the hairless creatures who found them, feared them, and finally stole them from their home. I wonder if the young ones who tried to learn our words ever mastered them. I wonder if they forgive us. That word haunts me still. Leave. Leave. Such a simple request. All they wanted was to be left alone, to live their hidden lives in their shrinking wilderness. Instead, we cataloged them, contained them, and finally disappeared them as efficiently as we've disappeared every other inconvenient truth. But here's what really breaks my heart. In trying to protect their secret, I became complicit in their erasure. Every day I kept silent was another day they slipped further toward oblivion. My signature on that NDA might as well have been signed in. Their blood, the morphine's kicking in now. Everything's getting soft around the edges. But before I go, one last thing. If you find them, if by some miracle they're still out there, tell them Thomas Crenshaw remembered. Tell them he was sorry. Tell them we should have listened. Tell them we should have left.